In fact, after bearing 10 children, Dickens' wife found herself separated, and he even tried to shut her up in a lunatic asylum. It was really a very poor marriage indeed. And I think this is important when we're doing historical research, that we separate the person's physical, life and times with their artwork, their literature, or their art, because, often it's not a perfect world and people do have troubles, and certainly Dickens had a lot of troubles in his personal life. If you walk along to the next one, we have a little pharmacy here that helps us to think about what medicine and what a pharmacy was like back during the mid-1800s. And you'll see the Victorian pharmacy here. You can camera in and see some research on medicine, and particularly thinking about our character of Tiny Tim. We're all sympathetic of little Tiny Tim in the story of A Christmas Carol, and often people have throughout the years been puzzled by what his infirmed condition actually was. You'll find research in this room, if you look inside the Victorian pharmacy, that shows that most researchers now believe that Tiny Tim suffered from tuberculosis, and possibly he had rickets as well. There are a lot of clues in the book that lead us to this discovery about his physical condition, and also Dickens' life. He had some illness with friends and family members that may have led him to create the character of Tiny Tim. Often good writers use the people that they actually know in their life to model their characters, and indeed Dickens often did that. Then if you all will follow me, and I'm getting a few shots of you as you're walking along, I hope you don't mind. This next one, I'll stand at the corner so you can kind of look in or even walk in the prison room should you choose to. Walk on in. It's the prisons of the Victorian era. This research in this museum room is by Marie Vans. Life, we know, was really tough in the Victorian era for the people who lived in London and in England. They were treated poorly, and certainly they were treated poorly in prisons. Some of the famous prisons include the Cold Bath Fields Prison, the Clink Prison, and Newgate Prison. You can come back here and view the entire presentation later. Dickens did write a lot about prison life and all kinds of details about life in London during his lifetime. I like the bars on the window there. And you can see she's got a little bit here about Dickens and the law, and a little bit of a courtroom from those days, and I'll read a bit that she shared with me here. In the days of Dickens, lawyers didn't have to endure as many years of school and no bar exam to pass. Many studied law in law offices under experienced mentors. Dickens was not formally trained as a lawyer, but he worked as a law clerk, a court reporter, and a reporter for Parliament. At age 15, he was hired as an attorney's clerk, serving subpoenas, registering wills, copying transcripts, and later he became a court reporter. For 3 years, he was surrounded by law students, by law clerks, copying clerks, court clerks, magistrates, barristers, and solicitors. Dickens himself enrolled as a law student in 1839 when he was 27, and in 1846 inquired about work as a magistrate. His biographer, Claire Tomalin, hints that Dickens, like David Copperfield, didn't pursue a legal education, in part because he could not afford the 100 pounds needed. Of his 10 children, only Henry was successful as a lawyer. Dickens did not think highly of lawyers. One of his characters in Bleak House, Mr. Vholes, said, "Most lawyers infest dimly lighted, moldy offices like maggots in nuts." Courtrooms of the day had bad conditions. The ventilation was terrible. The rooms were cramped, dirty, dark, and shady. That's where most of the legal discussions took place. One historian tells of a court where, to improve the airflow court, officials pumped in air from the main sewer. The unclear robing rooms and lack of resources forced lawyers to share the limited supply of towels, combs, and water. There was a general rudeness toward jury members, witnesses, and clients. These were not pleasant times to be involved with legal matters. Sue Moon is a law librarian at Tulane University. So a lot of our researchers choose projects that relate to their own skills, interests, and knowledge. But if you are interested at all in Victorian times, we're adding to this research every year, and you certainly can do some research. Contact me later if you think about something that might add to our research project here. You can come back and learn more about the law. She's got a lot of great links inside the Dickens and the Law Room. Let's walk next over to Victorian food. Feel free to walk inside should you choose to. And a lot of the events throughout the month, because the Dickens Project, as you know, is going to be open throughout the month of December and closes on January the 3rd. So you can come back, and some of the events will have a lot to do with food and dancing and festivities. Certainly the Fezziwig Ball, mark your calendar. That is this coming Saturday at 2 p.m. on the 19th. Dickens was a foodie, and he writes a lot about food in his stories. This room shares about some of the common foods eaten at the time. Sugar was scarce, but some foods were quite abundant, and they were more nutritious than you might think. They had abundant amounts of beets and onions, cabbage, apples, cherries, and watercress. Their bread was nutritious as it was stone ground. And when Dickens described food in many of his stories, it was quite a description. A lot of you probably remember when he meets the ghost of Christmas present in A Christmas Carol. He describes heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense twelfth cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber din with their delicious steam. Yes, he was quite a foodie, and he describes food very well in his stories. He also talks about the Victorian Christmas crackers that they had in those years. In 1848, a British confectioner invented a bold new way to sell sweets, inspired by a trip to Paris where he saw bonbons, sugared almonds wrapped in twists of paper, and he came up with the idea of the Christmas cracker, a simple package filled with sweets that snapped when you pulled it apart. What did people wear during the times in Victorian London? Some of you are dressed today in Victorian attire. I think dressing the part when you come into a historical simulation really helps you sort of get the flavor and the feel. And as librarians, we really want to help educators come up with simulations that are historically accurate and authentic. And we also want them to share with their students ways to find historical attire. Not that we want to be the clothing cops. If someone doesn't wear accurate clothing, it's certainly fine. I think what we want to do is promote awareness of what is actually the way they were dressed and what is maybe, not from that century. That's just part of learning about history. You'll find a couple of fun projects in this research room. One by Bethany Winslow that talks about getting dressed, women getting dressed in the Victorian era in just 10 minutes. She says it's actually possible, but when you hear about all the layer after layer of clothing, it seems kind of hard to believe that they could get ready that quickly. There were so many layers, from the layers of undergarments with and different types of lacings, such as the corsets and the petticoats, and even their shoes had many, many laces to be laced up. They had the hobnail, as well as sometimes flat shoes and boots. A lot of them required hooks that you would have to pull through. Research on clothing of the times, as well as the architecture and the furnishings, as I mentioned, is important in authenticity for historical simulations.